In 1801, something extraordinary happened in Edinburgh, something so bizarre that it would linger in the city's dark history for years to come. A cadaver, seemingly untouched by time or decay, defied all natural laws. In a world where death was feared, revered, and often misunderstood, the appearance of a body that refused to decompose sent shockwaves through the scientific community, religious circles, and the public alike. How could a human corpse retain its shape, its skin, its form, as if the very hands of time had stopped working on it? The discovery sent waves of intrigue and terror rippling through the streets of Edinburgh, a city already on edge with its proximity to scientific advancements, dark curiosity, and an unsettling atmosphere that hung in the air. At the time, Edinburgh wasn't just Scotland's capital, but a beating heart of intellectual thought and medical experimentation. It was a city of paradoxes, beautiful yet haunting, progressive yet steeped in old-world superstition. It was a place where the boundaries of life and death were often blurred, where scientists sought answers to the deepest mysteries of the human body, while the public struggled to understand and accept these strange revelations. In Edinburgh, the human body was no longer just something to be mourned. It was an object of fascination, a vessel to be dissected, studied, and experimented upon. Medical schools, led by renowned figures like Dr. Robert Knox, were filled with young men eager to learn, but the supply of cadavers was limited. In this atmosphere, the practice of body snatching was born, gruesome and illegal, but necessary for advancing medical science. And yet, amidst this dark trade, the corpse that refused to decompose stood out. It was not just a body, it was a message, a puzzle, a challenge to the very foundations of science and mortality. As news of the preserved cadaver spread, so too did the rumors. Theories swirled, some rooted in superstition, others in the fervent need to explain the inexplicable. Was this body cursed? Could it be the work of the devil, a body that refused to decompose as a sign of some malevolent force at work? Or was there a more logical, scientific explanation? Was it a chemical reaction within the body, something the scientists of the time could not yet comprehend? Perhaps there was an entirely natural explanation that had yet to be discovered, some factor that allowed the body to avoid the normal processes of decay. People from all walks of life traveled to see it. The streets around the display were filled with an unsettling mixture of awe and fear. There was something magnetic about it, something that drew the crowds in, despite the chill of unease that hung in the air. In a way, the body became more than just an object of curiosity. It became a symbol of the unknown, of the boundaries of human understanding, of the very nature of life and death. The public's morbid fascination with the cadaver was not unlike the attraction one feels when standing at the edge of a great precipice, gazing into the abyss. You can't help but stare, even though you know the danger is real. But this story isn't just about a body that refused to decompose. It's about the society that witnessed it, the scientists who examined it, and the mystery that still lingers to this day. It's about what happens when the natural order is disrupted, when the line between the living and the dead is blurred, and the consequences of that disruption ripple through time. For in the year 1801, Edinburgh wasn't just dealing with a medical anomaly, it was confronting something far deeper, something that tested the very nature of human understanding. The body that defied decay became the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation. Was it a freak of nature, a fluke, or was it something far more significant, something that had never been seen before, and perhaps never would again? The world of science, still in its infancy, struggled to provide answers. The understanding of decomposition was rudimentary, with most theories revolving around simple concepts like exposure to the elements or the presence of specific bacteria that could halt the rotting process. However, no one could explain how this particular body managed to survive for so long, seemingly untouched by time. Some scientists argued that the answer lay in the environment. Could the climate in Edinburgh, with its damp, cool conditions, have played a part? After all, the process of decomposition was understood to be influenced by temperature and humidity. Others suggested that perhaps the body had been embalmed with some unknown substance, maybe even a primitive form of embalming technique that allowed it to remain preserved far longer than any body should. But these explanations were unsatisfactory, as no one could pinpoint exactly what it was that had prevented this body from following the natural course of decay. Then there were those who refused to see this as a scientific anomaly at all. For them, the body was a sign, a warning, or perhaps even a miracle. The very fact that it refused to decompose seemed to suggest that it was not subject to the same laws that governed all other human remains. Some people began to whisper that the body was a sign of divine intervention, that it had been chosen for some greater purpose. The idea that the corpse had been preserved for reasons beyond human understanding tapped into deep-rooted fears and beliefs, and for many, it became a symbol of the unknowable. And yet, as the body continued to fascinate, disturb, and mystify, it did not provide the answers that people were hoping for. The scientific community, divided as it was, could not come to a consensus. Even the most experienced anatomists were stumped, unable to offer any logical explanation for the body's condition. It seemed that, for once, science had met its match in the realm of death. But perhaps the real question was not whether this body could be explained, but why it needed to be. What does it mean when a mystery of this magnitude refuses to be solved? What happens when a body, so profoundly dead, becomes something more than just a scientific object? In a city like Edinburgh, where life and death were inextricably intertwined with the pursuit of knowledge, this cadaver was more than just a body. It was a mirror to the fears, desires, and limitations of the people who encountered it. In the years that followed, the mystery of the body that refused to decompose would fade into the shadows of history. The people who had witnessed it would pass away, and the scientists who had tried to unlock its secrets would be remembered only for their failure to do so. But the story would live on in the dark corners of Edinburgh's history, a reminder of how death, often thought to be the final answer, could still surprise and confound even the most enlightened minds. Perhaps it was the final irony. In a city known for its intellectual rigor, the body that refused to decompose could not be understood. It was not just a medical anomaly, it was a symbol of the limits of human knowledge, a reminder that there are some mysteries in this world that may never be solved. And in the end, perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. The unknown lingers, just beyond our reach, reminding us that even in our darkest hours, there are things that will always defy explanation. In 1801, Edinburgh was a city at the crossroads of the ancient and the modern. It was a place where intellectual rigor and superstition coexisted uneasily, and where the pursuit of scientific knowledge was often at odds with deep-rooted cultural beliefs. The city, perched on the rugged hills of Scotland, was home to some of the world's brightest minds, a breeding ground for the Enlightenment movement that had swept across Europe in the previous century. Here, the scientific method was being born, with reason and observation replacing divine authority and religious dogma as the ultimate ways of understanding the world. Yet even in a city known for its intellect and progressive ideas, the line between the natural and supernatural was still incredibly blurred. At the time, Edinburgh's medical community was thriving. The city boasted some of the finest universities and hospitals in Europe, where ambitious students and esteemed professors grappled with the mysteries of the human body. In these institutions, the study of anatomy had become a critical part of medical education. Dissection of human corpses, once considered a sacrilege, was now an essential tool for learning the intricacies of human anatomy. But Edinburgh's medical schools were not immune to the dark practices of the time, namely, grave robbing and body snatching. The demand for cadavers was high, and the supply from legitimate sources, like executed criminals, was insufficient. This led to the illegal trade of freshly buried bodies, often procured by hired body snatchers who would exhume the dead from graveyards in the dead of night, selling them to eager medical students and professors. This dark commerce of the dead was driven by an insatiable curiosity and a growing need for anatomical knowledge. At the forefront of this scientific revolution was Dr. Robert Knox, one of the most renowned anatomists of the period. His anatomy lectures, often held at the renowned Edinburgh Medical School, were considered among the best in the world, attracting students from across Europe. Knox's name became synonymous with the cutting edge of medical science, but his involvement in the trade of stolen corpses would forever taint his legacy. His work represented a broader cultural shift in Edinburgh, where the fascination with death and the human body was growing stronger. But even as the city's medical community made strides in the field of human anatomy, the public remained deeply uneasy with these practices. To the common people, death was not something to be studied or dissected. It was something to be feared, mourned, and respected. Edinburgh, like many cities of the time, was steeped in religious and superstitious beliefs that painted death as a final transition to another world, a sacred event. The Church, while it acknowledged the importance of scientific inquiry, still held sway over many aspects of life, especially where death was concerned. This uneasy coexistence of faith and science created an environment ripe for intrigue, mystery, and suspicion. When the body that refused to decompose was discovered, it came at a time when the boundaries of life and death were being pushed further than ever before. The people of Edinburgh were accustomed to seeing the dead dissected and examined in scientific settings, but a body that defied natural decomposition? That was something entirely new. To many, It was a sign that the normal rules of life and death no longer applied, a disruption of the natural order that stirred both awe and fear. The city was already grappling with a growing sense of unease. There were whispers of dark forces at work, of forces that lay beyond human understanding. Edinburgh streets were filled with people who had witnessed strange happenings, from ghosts to inexplicable phenomena. For some, the idea of a body that refused to decay was nothing short of supernatural. They saw it as an omen, a sign that the laws of nature were no longer governing the world, that something otherworldly was at play. For others, it was simply a medical mystery, one that would be unraveled by science, as all mysteries were supposed to be. However, for those who had a deeper understanding of the medical landscape, the corpse that refused to decompose was more than just an anomaly, it was a challenge. It was a challenge to the very foundation of medical science, which, at the time, still lacked a complete understanding of the processes of decay. While dissection was common in medical schools, few had studied decomposition in such detail. How long did it take for a body to decay? What caused decomposition in the first place? What factors could slow or even prevent it? At the time, science was still in its infancy when it came to understanding the full spectrum of human biology. While the practice of dissection was well established, many of the underlying causes of bodily decay remained a mystery. Doctors and anatomists knew that when a person died, the body began to break down due to the action of bacteria, enzymes, and the natural processes of decay. But there was still much they did not know. Why did some bodies decompose faster than others? Was it the temperature, the humidity, or the chemical composition of the body that determined the rate of decay? These were questions that no one had fully answered, and so, the appearance of a body that refused to decay presented a puzzle, one that could not easily be solved with the knowledge available at the time. The corpse that refused to decompose raised these questions in stark relief. The body was found under circumstances that would have seemed unremarkable if not for its condition. The fact that it had remained intact, even after being exposed to the elements for an extended period, was what set it apart. In a time when the human body was still treated with a combination of reverence and scientific curiosity, a preserved corpse seemed to suggest that the line between the living and the dead was thinner than anyone had realized. Edinburgh, with its reputation as a city of scientific discovery, was the ideal backdrop for such a mystery. It was a city where intellectuals, scientists, and laypeople alike were constantly grappling with the unknown. The city's narrow streets, often shrouded in fog, felt like a fitting stage for a mystery that blurred the lines between science and superstition. It was a place where old beliefs collided with new knowledge, and where the boundaries between the living and the dead were not always as clear as one might hope. As the body's mystery grew, so too did the fascination and dread surrounding it. Some argued that the body had been preserved by a rare, unknown chemical or substance that had kept it from decaying. Others believed that it had been intentionally preserved, perhaps by a process of embalming, though there was little evidence to support such a claim. Still, others suggested that there was something supernatural at play, perhaps divine intervention, or the work of darker forces. For those who sought to understand the body scientifically, the questions only multiplied. Was it a natural phenomenon that science had yet to explain? Or was it something more? The fact that it defied the natural order of decay led many to wonder if there was a hidden force, a mysterious element at work that science had not yet discovered. For the people of Edinburgh, it was a mystery that would forever remain unsolved, leaving them with only speculation and fear. At the heart of the mystery lay the people of Edinburgh themselves, the curious onlookers who crowded around the body, the scientists who examined it, and the public who could not help but wonder whether it was a sign of something greater. It was a mystery that blurred the lines between the living and the dead, between science and superstition, and between reason and belief. And as the body continued to stand as a testament to the unknown, Edinburgh remained a city suspended between past and future, between death and life, where the mysteries of the human body were both a source of fascination and terror. When the cadaver that defied decomposition was discovered, it immediately became the center of attention. The body, which had been found under unusual circumstances, had a condition so bizarre that it could not easily be explained by the standards of the time. It seemed untouched by the passage of days, weeks, and even months. To the onlookers, it was as though the body was caught in a suspended state, preserved by some unseen force. The air around the body buzzed with unease, a chilling combination of disbelief and morbid curiosity that drew crowds from all corners of Edinburgh. What had once been a routine discovery had quickly transformed into a mystery that gripped the imagination of an entire city. The body was not just a corpse, it was a symbol of the unknown, a puzzle that demanded an explanation. The first observers who examined the body were struck not only by its unnaturally well-preserved condition but also by the unsettling air of the whole discovery. The skin, despite the passage of time, appeared to be almost lifelike. Its color, texture, and even its tautness seemed unaffected by the usual processes of decay. For a corpse that should have been in a state of advanced decomposition, it was almost too perfect, too untouched. Its features, eyes, lips, even fingernails, seemed as though they had been frozen in time. There was something deeply unsettling about it, as though the laws of nature had momentarily been suspended. And for those who looked too long, the very sight of the body seemed to bring with it an inexplicable sense of dread. Among the first to study the body were medical professionals, most likely those from the nearby universities or associated with the medical schools. Edinburgh, at the turn of the 19th century, was renowned for its contributions to the study of anatomy. But even in this city of intellectual brilliance, the preservation of a body in such an extraordinary state was something that confounded the best minds. Medical students and professors, accustomed to dissecting the dead for educational purposes, had never encountered anything like it. It was not merely a corpse, it was an enigma. The initial reactions to the body were a mixture of disbelief and fascination. The body seemed to defy every known principle of anatomy and physiology. How could it remain intact when all other corpses, under similar conditions, would have begun to decompose long before? What was it about this particular body that allowed it to escape the normal cycle of death? The first medical professionals who took a closer look at the body began their investigation by closely examining its condition. They looked for signs of embalming, mummification, or some kind of external preservation method. But there were no visible signs of such techniques. The skin wasn't waxy or hardened, as embalmed bodies often were, nor did it show any signs of the chemical treatments that would be expected in a body preserved for display. The hair, too, was startlingly intact, unlike the usual decomposition process where hair and nails would rapidly deteriorate. What was most shocking was that the body had been exposed to the elements for some time, yet it appeared no different from the day it had been discovered. The usual signs of decay, such as the bloating of the abdomen or the foul odor of rotting flesh, were completely absent. It was as though this body was not playing by the same rules as others. Despite their best efforts, the initial examination only led to more questions. Some suggested that the body had been preserved through an unknown natural process, something yet to be identified by science. Could it have been the environment? Edinburgh's damp, cold climate was known to slow down the process of decomposition, but not to the extent that it could stop it entirely. Could it have been some chemical in the soil or the air, some unseen element that had preserved the body? Perhaps there were bacteria or fungi in the ground that had inhibited the decay process, although this was an idea not fully explored at the time. But despite these theories, none of them provided a satisfactory explanation. The body was too perfect in its preservation, too untouched by the usual ravages of time. As word of the preserved body spread through Edinburgh, people from all walks of life came to witness the extraordinary sight. Some came out of simple curiosity, eager to see something that was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Others came with a more morbid fascination, drawn by the idea of seeing a corpse that refused to decay. There were also those who came with the hope of finding some kind of divine message or supernatural meaning. After all, in an era when death was seen as a spiritual event, a body that did not decay could be interpreted as a sign of something greater. Some believed it was a miracle, a gift from God. Others, less religious and more scientifically inclined, saw it as a challenge, a mystery that begged for resolution. The idea that the body could have some supernatural explanation was especially appealing to those who were uncomfortable with the more clinical, scientific approach to death. For centuries, the death of a person was seen as a divine mystery, a transition to the afterlife. To see a body that did not decay seemed to suggest that death had somehow been cheated, that the natural order had been disrupted. For these individuals, the body's preservation could not be explained away by mere biology or chemistry. It was something beyond human comprehension. And so, the supernatural theories began to take root. Some whispered that the body was cursed, while others suggested that it had been preserved by dark magic or occult forces. In this climate of superstition, every strange occurrence seemed to carry a deeper, more sinister meaning. But even as these supernatural theories gained traction, the more rational thinkers in the city refused to entertain them. For them, the body was simply an anomaly that could, and would, be explained by science. Yet, despite their best efforts, the answers remained elusive. It became clear that the preservation of this body was not something that could be easily explained by existing knowledge. The investigation turned into a search for answers, one that would delve deep into the very nature of decomposition, preservation, and the boundaries of life and death. As the weeks passed, more individuals, particularly from the medical community, examined the body with increasing interest. However, as much as they tried to replicate the conditions that had led to this strange preservation, they could not recreate the effect. The body remained a mystery, frustrating both religious and scientific minds alike. To the religious, it was a test of faith, a reminder that some things were beyond human understanding. To the scientists, it was a puzzle, a challenge to the accepted laws of nature, one that demanded an answer. But in the end, it became apparent that the mystery of the body that refused to decompose would remain unsolved. Despite the best efforts of medical experts, no one could explain why this body had escaped the usual process of death and decay. In the face of these unanswered questions, the body of the cadaver became more than just an object of fascination. It became a symbol of human limitations, a reminder that some mysteries of life and death could never be fully understood. The body, perfectly preserved in the face of overwhelming odds, served as a haunting reminder that there were forces in the world that lay beyond human control. And for the people of Edinburgh, it remained an unsolvable riddle, a testament to the complexity of life, death, and everything in between. When the body that refused to decompose was discovered, its mysterious condition quickly attracted the attention of the city's medical professionals. Edinburgh, in the early 1800s, was a hub for scientific inquiry and medical advancement, known for its progressive approach to the human body and anatomy. Yet, despite the city's academic reputation, this cadaver presented an anomaly unlike any they had encountered. For a city that prided itself on pushing the boundaries of medical knowledge, this corpse was an undeniable challenge. The case sparked intense debate and curiosity among Edinburgh's physicians, who sought to unlock the secrets of the body's preservation. The first step in the investigation was a thorough examination of the body itself. The corpse was examined by some of the most respected anatomists of the time, including Dr. Robert Knox, who was a leading figure in the study of human anatomy. As a professor at Edinburgh's medical school, Dr. Knox had seen his fair share of dissected bodies and had even been involved in the controversial practice of body snatching to acquire fresh cadavers for educational purposes. He was no stranger to death, decay, and dissection, but this body posed a question that science could not easily answer. The first thing that struck the physicians was the complete absence of any signs of decomposition. The body, though deceased for an extended period, showed none of the usual indications of decay. Typically, after a few days, the human body would begin to undergo a series of changes: bloating, discoloration, and the foul odor associated with decomposition. Yet this body had none of these characteristics. Its skin was intact and almost lifelike, its facial features well preserved. Even its hair and nails appeared as though they had not been exposed to the normal ravages of death. It was as though the body had been frozen in time, caught in a state of unnatural preservation. The medical community was both fascinated and unnerved by this anomaly. With no visible signs of embalming, mummification, or any other preservation techniques, the anatomists were left to consider more unusual possibilities. Some suggested that the body had been treated with an unknown substance, perhaps a chemical compound that had stopped the decomposition process. Chemicals like arsenic, which had been used in early embalming methods, were discussed as potential candidates. However, even with the rudimentary knowledge of chemical preservation techniques at the time, this theory didn't seem to fully account for the body's extraordinary state. The body did not show any signs of artificial preservation. It wasn't waxy, hardened, or artificially stiff. The flesh retained its flexibility and the skin its natural appearance. Other physicians considered the possibility of a natural cause for the body's preservation. The climate in Edinburgh was damp and cold, and these conditions might have slowed the natural process of decomposition. Some suggested that the body could have been exposed to an unusually dry or cold environment that had preserved it by halting bacterial growth. However, these explanations seemed unsatisfactory. While cold temperatures could slow decomposition, they would not stop it entirely. Furthermore, the body had been exposed to the elements for an extended period, yet it showed no sign of the typical preservation that might come with environmental factors like extreme cold or dryness. It was clear that something more complex was at work. Theories began to emerge, but none of them provided a definitive answer. The scientific community was still in its infancy when it came to understanding the full process of decomposition. By this point, scientists had started to understand the basic principles of decay, how bacteria, enzymes, and environmental factors could influence the speed at which a body would decompose. But they had little understanding of what might cause some bodies to decay more slowly or remain preserved for longer periods. The body that had been discovered was a clear contradiction to everything they knew about the natural process of death. This prompted further investigation, but the more the doctors searched for answers, the more elusive the truth seemed to become. Some of the city's leading medical experts suggested that the preservation could have been caused by bacteria or microorganisms that inhibited decomposition. In the absence of modern forensic science, the idea of microbes was still largely unknown, and the idea that bacteria could play a role in preserving a body was not fully understood. But this theory was not well received, as the body's preservation was too extreme to be explained by the mere presence of bacteria or fungi alone. Additionally, there was no clear evidence of a microbial environment that would have preserved the body in such a way. The more they investigated, the more they were confronted with a strange silence from the body itself. No answers, only more questions. There was also the possibility that the body had been exposed to some form of chemical or mineral-rich soil that had preserved it in a similar manner to mummification. Certain conditions, such as the presence of specific minerals or chemicals in the ground, can slow down decomposition or even prevent it. This theory suggested that the body had been buried in soil that had acted like a preservative, but again, there was no definitive proof to support this. The surrounding area had been examined for any unusual elements, but none were found that could explain the extraordinary preservation of the corpse. The soil did not seem to contain any substances that would account for the body's condition. As the investigation continued, some individuals began to consider less conventional explanations. Some suggested that the body might have been preserved by a natural form of mummification. While this was not entirely outside the realm of possibility, it raised many questions. Mummification, as it was understood in ancient Egypt, required specific conditions of heat, dryness, and embalming techniques that were simply not present in 19th century Edinburgh. Furthermore, the body in question had not been intentionally preserved. It had not undergone the elaborate procedures associated with mummification. If mummification was indeed at play, it would have been a rare and unknown form, one that had never been seen before. The fascination with the body extended beyond the realm of the medical community. The public became increasingly captivated by the mysterious cadaver, and its discovery began to take on a life of its own. People from all walks of life, commoners, intellectuals, even the clergy, were drawn to see it for themselves. The body became a spectacle, a point of intrigue that transcended the boundaries of science. It was no longer just a medical puzzle. It had become a cultural phenomenon, a thing of myth and legend. People began to speculate wildly about its origins, its preservation, and what it meant for their understanding of life and death. The strange condition of the body also led to a growing number of religious interpretations. Some saw the preserved body as a miracle, an act of divine intervention. To them, the body's resistance to decay was a sign of something greater, a message from God. Others, however, saw it as a troubling omen, a sign that the natural order had been disrupted. Death, after all, was meant to be a finality, a transition from life to the afterlife. But this body seemed to challenge that belief. For some, the idea of a body that refused to decompose was a violation of sacred laws, a force that could not be explained by human understanding. But in the face of all these conflicting theories, one fact remained clear: the body was not behaving like any corpse that had come before it. It was not decomposing in the way that death had always been understood to work. And that simple truth, the fact that the body refused to follow the natural course of decay, was enough to keep the medical community and the public alike entranced with its mystery. Despite all the theories, none of them could fully account for the bizarre preservation of the body, and as time passed, it seemed that the answers would remain elusive. The body, in its stillness and preservation, became a symbol of the boundaries of human knowledge, an enigma that no one could solve, a puzzle that would forever remain unsolved. The search for an explanation only deepened the mystery, and as the years went by, the body faded into history, its secrets forever locked away. As the body that defied decomposition continued to intrigue both the medical community and the public, various theories began to emerge in an attempt to explain its unusual preservation. These theories ranged from the purely scientific to the supernatural, as people struggled to find a rational explanation for a phenomenon that appeared to transcend the natural order. The body, seemingly suspended in time, became the center of a growing intellectual debate. But despite the intense scrutiny and many hypotheses, No single explanation seemed to satisfy all who investigated it. For every scientific theory, there was a religious or supernatural counterclaim, and each potential answer seemed to raise more questions than it answered. One of the first theories proposed was that the body had been preserved through the action of the environment. Edinburgh, like much of Scotland, had a cold and damp climate, with high humidity and long winters. Some believed that these environmental conditions could have slowed the decomposition process, preserving the body far longer than one might expect. The idea was that the moisture in the air, combined with the colder temperatures, might have acted as a natural preservative. However, this explanation, while plausible in some respects, did not fully account for the extent of the preservation. Bodies that were exposed to the elements for a prolonged period typically showed clear signs of decay, swelling, discoloration, and the unpleasant smell of decomposition. This body, however, exhibited none of these signs. Its skin remained taut and smooth, its hair and nails intact, and its features seemed as lifelike as they had been at the moment of death. It was as though the natural forces that typically hasten decay had been halted entirely, which made this environmental theory seem insufficient. Another line of thought was that some kind of chemical or mineral presence in the soil could have played a role in the preservation of the body. This theory suggested that certain substances in the earth, such as minerals or chemicals, might have reacted with the body's tissues in a way that halted the usual processes of decay. In some parts of the world, bodies buried in specific types of soil have been found to undergo a form of natural mummification, where the minerals in the ground preserve the body's skin and organs. It was suggested that the cadaver in question might have been buried in such a place, where the soil itself acted as a preservative agent. However, upon examination of the surrounding soil, no such minerals or chemicals were found that could explain the body's remarkable state of preservation. The body had not been subjected to the conditions typically associated with mummification, and the soil showed no signs of contributing to the body's preservation. This, too, seemed an unlikely explanation. A more radical theory proposed that the body had been intentionally preserved through some form of early embalming or chemical treatment. The practice of embalming, though not as advanced as it would later become, was known in some cultures and had begun to take hold in certain parts of Europe by the early 19th century. However, the body did not exhibit the telltale signs of embalming, such as the use of wax, resins, or other chemicals commonly associated with the process. The flesh did not feel firm or waxy as it would if it had been treated with preservatives. The cadaver seemed to retain its natural pliability, and there was no evidence of the distinctive preservation techniques that had been used in ancient Egypt or by modern European embalmers. Additionally, the body had not been prepared or treated for public display, a common reason for embalming during that period. It was clear that, despite the growing interest in preserving human remains, this body had not been deliberately treated to resist decomposition. With these explanations falling short, the more fantastical theories began to gain traction. Some speculated that the body had been preserved by a force beyond the natural world, something supernatural in nature. In an age when religious beliefs still held significant sway over many aspects of life, it was not surprising that some individuals turned to divine or otherworldly explanations for the body's preservation. Some suggested that the corpse had been preserved by divine intervention, a miraculous sign from God or the gods. This idea was especially appealing to those who viewed death as a sacred transition, something that should not be tampered with. For them, the idea that a body could remain intact long after death was a sign of something greater, perhaps even a sign that the deceased had been chosen for a special purpose or had died in a state of grace. The body was no longer simply a corpse, it had become a symbol of spiritual power, a mysterious object of divine will. Others, less religious and more inclined to embrace darker ideas, proposed that the body had been preserved through occult practices or magic. In a time when superstition was rampant and belief in the supernatural was widespread, it was not unusual for people to look to dark forces when confronted with something they could not explain. Some suggested that the body had been subjected to occult rituals or magical rites, which had somehow prevented its decomposition. These ideas, though sensational, were often fueled by the pervasive fear of death and the unknown. The fact that the body defied the natural order of life and death was enough to spark these theories, and as more people became fascinated by the corpse, the supernatural explanations gained a foothold in the public imagination. Despite the intrigue surrounding these theories, none of them could fully explain the body's remarkable preservation. As the months went by, it became clear that the body was not going to decay in the way that most corpses did. It had defied every expectation, every law of biology, and continued to captivate the minds of all who saw it. The fact that none of the prevailing theories could provide a definitive explanation only deepened the mystery. And yet, the more time passed, the more people seemed to accept the body's existence as something extraordinary, a mystery that would never be fully solved. It was as if the body had become a symbol of the unknown, something that resisted explanation, something that stood outside the bounds of science and reason. One of the key challenges for scientists and medical professionals was the lack of knowledge about the process of decomposition at the time. While the basics were understood, decay was caused by bacteria, enzymes, and the natural processes of the body breaking down. No one had yet developed a full understanding of the factors that could slow or halt this process. The field of forensic science had not yet emerged, and much of what we now know about decomposition was still centuries away from discovery. This lack of understanding left the scientists of the day grasping at straws, trying to find answers in a world where the science was still in its infancy. Even as the scientific community sought answers, the public continued to be captivated by the corpse. People from all walks of life, from scholars to laypeople, gathered to see it, offering their own theories and speculations. The body became a spectacle, a symbol of both fascination and fear. Some saw it as a challenge to the known world, an object that refused to conform to the laws of nature. Others saw it as a sign of something greater, a message from beyond the grave, a warning, or even a blessing. Whatever it was, the body became something more than just a corpse. It became a cultural artifact, an icon that represented the mysteries of life and death. In the end, the theories that surrounded the body did little to solve the mystery of its preservation. Instead, they added to the enigma, making the body even more of a symbol of the unknown. Whether it was the environment, a chemical reaction, divine intervention, or something else entirely, the fact remained that the body had defied decomposition in a way that science could not explain. And so, it passed into history not as a scientific curiosity, but as a legend, a mystery that would never be fully unraveled, leaving behind only questions that would linger long after the body itself had faded into obscurity. As the months stretched on, the cadaver that refused to decompose continued to draw attention from all corners of Edinburgh. What had begun as a simple medical curiosity quickly evolved into a full-blown spectacle, a dark enigma that captivated not only the intellectual elite but the general populace as well. The body, still as lifelike as the day it had been discovered, stood as a silent challenge to everything the world thought it knew about death, decay, and the human body. For the medical community, the situation had become more than just an anomaly. It was a symbol of the unknown, a reminder of how much was yet to be discovered in the natural world. The fascination surrounding the body only grew over time. Crowds would gather outside the building where it was being kept, eager to catch a glimpse of the corpse that defied nature. These onlookers, a mix of curious locals, tourists, and scholars, all shared one thing in common: a morbid desire to witness firsthand something that seemed to defy the natural laws of life and death. Some came to see it with the hope of uncovering its secret, to witness something that would answer the deepest questions about human mortality. Others came simply to satisfy their curiosity, to see something that was unlike anything they had ever encountered. But regardless of their motivations, all were struck by the same chilling sense of awe and dread when they looked upon the preserved body. The idea that a body could remain intact for so long, showing no signs of decomposition despite being exposed to the elements for months, was unsettling. It was as if the natural order had been turned upside down. Death, for most people, was a well-understood process, one that followed an established pattern of decay and eventual disintegration. It was a finality, an end to the body's function, and yet here was evidence that death had not followed its usual course. This presented a crisis for many, both religious individuals and scientific minds alike. For those who adhered to traditional beliefs, this anomaly was seen as a test of faith, a divine mystery, or even a miracle. The very existence of such a body, they believed, was a sign from God or the supernatural forces that governed life and death. On the other hand, for the more scientifically inclined, the discovery of the preserved cadaver posed a different set of challenges. Edinburgh, as a hub of intellectual inquiry, had long prided itself on its contributions to science and medicine, and yet this was something no one could explain. The city's brightest minds, many of whom were already familiar with the body's tendency to decay and the factors that accelerated or slowed down the process, found themselves confounded. They had knowledge of the decomposition process, but this body defied everything they thought they knew. Theories were proposed, analyzed, and discarded, and yet none could fully account for the body's state of preservation. The most prominent explanation offered by medical professionals at the time was that the body was in some way preserved by the environment. Edinburgh's climate, with its constant dampness and relatively cool temperatures, could, they reasoned, slow down the process of decay. Some even speculated that the body might have been buried in an area with a certain chemical or mineral composition that inhibited decay. While this seemed to hold some weight, the conditions were not enough to explain the total lack of decomposition. Bodies exposed to the elements in similar environments still showed signs of decay. Moreover, the body had not been buried in a sealed or special environment, but rather had been left out in the open for an extended period, which made this theory even less plausible. Another hypothesis that emerged was that the body had been intentionally preserved using some unknown form of embalming. At this point in history, embalming was not the elaborate and scientifically developed process we know today, but rudimentary forms of embalming had existed for centuries. The idea was that perhaps someone had performed an early form of preservation, using chemicals like arsenic or alcohol to keep the body from decaying. But when experts examined the corpse, they found no evidence of the typical signs of embalming. No waxy or hardened skin, no pungent chemicals, no unnatural stiffening of the limbs. This body appeared entirely natural in its state, almost as if it had been suspended in a moment of time. This theory, too, quickly faltered, as the body did not bear the hallmarks of any known preservation method. As the mystery deepened, more speculative and supernatural theories began to surface. For many people, the idea of a body that defied decomposition was simply too strange to be explained by mere science. Some religious individuals viewed the preserved body as a sign of divine intervention. They believed that the body had been preserved by the will of God, either as a miracle or as some sort of spiritual test. In their view, the body was not just an anomaly, it was a divine message, a signal from beyond the grave. For these individuals, the body represented a deeper truth about life, death, and the afterlife, a truth that science could not explain. Others, less religious but still steeped in the mystical beliefs of the time, considered the possibility of occult or supernatural forces at play. The idea that the body had been preserved through magical means was not so far-fetched in an age when belief in witchcraft, the supernatural, and occult rituals was still common. Some suggested that the body had been subjected to dark magic or rituals that had frozen it in a state of preservation. To those who believed in the power of occult forces, this theory offered an answer, albeit a dark and terrifying one, that helped make sense of the mystery. They speculated that the body was not just preserved by chance, but by a force that defied human understanding. The body's preservation, whether attributed to divine will or dark forces, became symbolic of something much greater than a mere scientific curiosity. It became a focal point for the fears and hopes of the people of Edinburgh, a city already steeped in superstition and mystery. As the body was displayed, it began to take on a life of its own, becoming a local legend. Those who had witnessed the body's preservation were quick to spread tales of its remarkable state, and soon, rumors and stories began to circulate. Some claimed that the body had been cursed, that it was a sign of impending doom, or that it was somehow connected to an ancient, forgotten power. The body became more than just a corpse, it became a symbol of the unknown, a point of fear and fascination that transcended both science and religion. As the years passed, the body gradually faded from public view. Its mysteries remained unsolved, and its reputation grew. For the medical professionals who had examined it, the body became a symbol of the limits of human knowledge. Despite the wealth of scientific advancements made in Edinburgh, this single corpse stood as an unyielding reminder of how much was still unknown about the workings of life and death. For the public, the body represented something deeper, something that could not be explained, no matter how hard people tried. It became a living paradox, a reminder that some mysteries might never be solved, that some questions might never be answered. The body that refused to decompose eventually became a part of Edinburgh's history, a piece of the city's dark, mysterious past. It was a tale whispered in the alleys and taverns of the city, a legend that people spoke of in hushed tones. Over time, the specifics of the body's discovery faded into obscurity, but the story lived on. It was a story that captured the imaginations of generations, a tale of death and preservation, of science and superstition, of the natural world and the supernatural forces that seemed to challenge it. In the end, the body's refusal to decompose was not just a medical puzzle, it was a cultural phenomenon, a mystery that resonated with people long after the body had disappeared from public view. It stood as a symbol of the limits of human knowledge, a reminder that there are some things in life and death that cannot be explained. The cadaver, preserved in defiance of the natural order, would remain one of Edinburgh's greatest unsolved mysteries, a haunting reminder of the boundary between what we understand and what remains beyond our grasp. The mystery of the body that refused to decompose continued to haunt both the medical and public imagination long after it had faded from public view. Even though the body's preservation had baffled scientists and religious individuals alike, its lingering presence in the collective consciousness became more than just a medical curiosity. It symbolized something deeper, something that cut to the heart of humanity's greatest fears and curiosities. How could this body resist the natural forces of decay? What did it mean about the afterlife, about death itself? These questions, unanswered, hung like a shadow over the city of Edinburgh. As time went on, the discovery of the preserved cadaver began to fade into myth, becoming a dark and enigmatic chapter in the city's history. In the years following its public display, accounts of the body's condition became more exaggerated, distorted by the passage of time. The details of the body's discovery grew more fantastical with each retelling, and the body itself, now little more than a distant memory, became a part of Edinburgh's folklore. Some claimed that the body had been preserved by a miracle, an act of divine intervention, while others suggested that it had been the result of an occult ritual, an unholy process that defied natural law. The truth of the body's preservation, shrouded in mystery, became less important than the stories it inspired, the fear and awe it evoked. For those who had witnessed the body in its preserved state, the memory remained a haunting one. The preservation of a human body, so complete and so lifelike, was an experience that could not easily be forgotten. Many who had seen the body spoke of a strange, almost unnatural stillness that clung to it. There was something unsettling about the way the corpse seemed to defy time, a stillness that was at once beautiful and horrifying. To witness something so perfectly preserved, untouched by time's usual ravages, was to be confronted with the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. But it also stirred something deeper, a feeling of mystery and wonder. If this body could escape the normal process of decomposition, what else might be possible? Was this a glimpse into a world beyond death, or was it simply a bizarre quirk of nature that could not be explained? The experience of seeing the body left many with lingering questions. Some turned to religion, seeking comfort in the idea that the body's preservation was a divine act, a sign that death was not the end. For those who were religious, it was easy to see the body as a symbol of hope, a message that there was more to life than what could be seen or touched. Others, less inclined toward religious explanations, sought answers in the supernatural, in the world of magic and the occult. In an age still heavily steeped in superstition, the idea of occult forces playing a role in the preservation of the body was a compelling one. For some, the mystery of the body became a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that there were forces at play in the world that could not be understood through science or faith alone. As the years passed, the story of the body began to be woven into the fabric of Edinburgh's darker history. It became a part of the city's legends, a story told in hushed tones in taverns and street corners, passed down from one generation to the next. In this way, the body took on a life of its own. It was no longer just a corpse, it was a symbol of something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries of science and religion. It represented humanity's darkest fears, the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, the fear that there might be something beyond our understanding. And yet, it also represented a kind of awe, a fascination with the mysteries of life and death that could never be fully explained. While the body's mystery remained unsolved, it continued to influence the way people viewed death and decay. For those who lived in Edinburgh at the time, the story of the preserved body served as a reminder of how little was known about the processes that governed life and death. In an era when science was still in its infancy, the body became an emblem of human ignorance. It was a stark reminder that even the brightest minds of the age could not explain everything, that there were forces at work in the world that were beyond human comprehension. For the medical community, the body was a humbling reminder of the limits of their knowledge, and for the public, it was a source of wonder and fear, a mystery that seemed to be forever beyond their grasp. The body's legacy extended far beyond Edinburgh. The story of the preserved cadaver spread to other cities, reaching the ears of scholars, scientists, and religious thinkers throughout Europe. As the years went on, the story became a subject of academic interest, with various historians and medical professionals seeking to uncover the truth behind the body's preservation. Some sought to investigate the scientific possibilities, while others turned to the more supernatural explanations that had gained currency in the public imagination. But despite their best efforts, the truth remained elusive. The body's preservation had become an enduring enigma, one that refused to be explained by any single theory. In time, the cadaver that had once stood as a symbol of scientific mystery and religious awe faded from public consciousness. The body was eventually removed from public display, its secrets locked away for good. But even though the physical body disappeared, its legacy lived on in the form of the questions it had raised, the mystery it had created. The story of the body that refused to decompose became part of the fabric of Edinburgh's dark history, a chapter in the city's past that would never be fully understood. The body's preservation was ultimately a symbol of the fragility of life and the inevitability of death. It stood as a reminder of the forces that govern our world, and of how little we truly know about the mysteries of the human body. In a world that was increasingly dominated by science and reason, the preserved body served as a stark reminder that there are still things beyond our understanding. It challenged the idea that death could be fully understood or controlled, and it forced those who witnessed it to confront the uncomfortable truth that life, in all its complexity, is something that cannot be easily explained. For those who had the misfortune, or perhaps the fortune, of encountering the body, the experience remained a powerful one. It left an indelible mark on their memories, a reminder that death is not the final word, that there are still mysteries to be uncovered, and that the natural world holds many secrets we have yet to understand. The story of the body that refused to decompose became a part of the mythology of Edinburgh, and in doing so, it took on a life of its own. It became more than just a medical mystery. It became a symbol of human curiosity, of our desire to understand the world around us, and of the eerie, unknowable forces that lie beyond the realm of science and reason. In the end, the body's preservation was a reminder of the limits of human knowledge and the vastness of the unknown. No matter how much we learn, no matter how far science takes us, there will always be mysteries that elude our grasp, forces beyond our comprehension. And perhaps that is what makes the story of the body that refused to decompose so compelling. It serves as a testament to our unyielding curiosity and our recognition that some mysteries are simply meant to remain unsolved. The body, preserved in defiance of nature's laws, will forever stand as a reminder that death, like life, is a mystery that can never be fully unraveled. As time marched on, the cadaver that refused to decompose faded further into the shadows of history. Yet, its legend lived on, whispered from one generation to the next, its mystery etched into the collective consciousness of those who had witnessed it or heard of its strange preservation. The story of the body's unnatural state was passed down not only through word of mouth but also through books, academic papers, and even the folklore of Edinburgh itself. It became more than just a medical curiosity. It transformed into an enduring symbol, a reminder of the limits of human knowledge, and a challenge to the natural order of life and death. The lingering fascination with the cadaver also marked a shift in how the public perceived death and decay. While the scientific community struggled with its inability to explain the preservation, the general populace began to see the body as something more profound than simply a scientific anomaly. For many, the body was not just a mystery to be unraveled but a symbol of the unnatural, a marker of forces beyond human comprehension. It represented the failure of science to provide answers, of nature to follow its expected course. The body that refused to decompose stirred a sense of wonder and fear, creating an unease about the boundaries of life and death that had never been fully explored. In the decades following the body's public display, the mystery continued to fuel debates about the nature of life and death. Religious interpretations were among the first to offer an answer to the enigma. For those who held deeply spiritual beliefs, the preserved body was seen as a divine sign. Some believed it was a miracle, a testament to the power of God, an earthly manifestation of something that lay beyond the understanding of mortal men. These interpretations often painted the body as a sacred object, one that had been preserved by divine will to serve as a reminder of life after death or to signal a special message from the heavens. In this view, the mystery surrounding the body was not meant to be solved. It was meant to be revered, a physical manifestation of the divine. Others, particularly those who were more skeptical of religious explanations, sought to explain the body's preservation through supernatural means. In an age when occultism was gaining popularity, there was no shortage of theories that suggested the body had been preserved through dark rituals, magic, or the use of forbidden knowledge. Some even claimed that the cadaver had been intentionally enchanted or cursed, preserved in its unnatural state by sorcery or the powers of witches and warlocks. In many ways, these theories fit perfectly with the fears and superstitions of the time. For a public that was increasingly open to the mystical and the occult, the preserved body became a subject of fascination, not just because of its condition, but because of the possibilities it suggested about the world beyond the natural. As the body continued to haunt the public imagination, some began to turn to scientific explanations in a desperate attempt to bring order to the chaos that the body represented. Various medical and scientific communities began to examine the cadaver's preservation more closely. In Edinburgh's world-renowned medical schools, scholars turned the case into a subject of study. They sought to uncover the truth behind the body's remarkable condition, hoping that it might lead to new insights into the process of decomposition, preservation, and perhaps even the very nature of death itself. Despite their best efforts, however, no one was able to conclusively explain the body's preservation, leaving the scientific community divided. Some scientists believed it was a case of extraordinary, but ultimately explainable, environmental factors, perhaps a combination of the damp climate and unique soil conditions that had slowed decomposition. Others, however, were less convinced. They saw the preservation as evidence of something beyond the reach of contemporary science, a phenomenon that could not be easily classified or understood. This tension between scientific inquiry and supernatural interpretation only deepened the body's legacy. It became a focal point for discussions about the nature of science and its limits. For many, the body represented a crossroads between the known and the unknown. As scientific advancements continued to push the boundaries of what was understood, this preserved corpse stood as an unyielding reminder of how little humanity truly knew about the mysteries of life and death. It was a challenge to the very notion of scientific progress, a reminder that some things might always remain beyond human understanding. The case of the body also sparked a wider public interest in death and preservation.